Hello! Happy Monday. I got sound, I think I do. You guys, I know, thanks, Joan. I know you guys, if you were here over the weekend for Stitch and Glitch with me and Jill, you know, I am never capable of getting all of the things checked for sound when me and Jill are streaming, but I think I finally, after, a year and a half, almost 2 years, geez, I can do this now on my own stream. So happy St. Patrick's Day. Kiss me, I'm Irish, at least for today. Sláinte, Aaron Go Brawless. There's all your St. Patrick's Day greetings. I read this hilarious thing yesterday. McSweeney's. I don't know if you are familiar with their magazine. I've never subscribed to the magazine, but I subscribe to the newsletter. And it's pretty funny sometimes. They're more serious stuff. Sometimes I read it, sometimes I don't. But the comedy stuff that they do, the humor stuff. Yesterday was an article called "My Culture is Not Your Costume, It's My Costume," which was about white dudes going to Ireland, making it their whole personality, and then having beef with people on St. Patrick's Day who try to take the Irish spirit. Like, Irish people have no time for us, right? I have been to some St. Patrick's Day celebrations in some major cities. Philadelphia, Boston. I've never been to Chicago during the dyeing of the Green River, but so many of my friends have, and I've seen the pictures, and yeah. Lots of bagpiping, lots of police benevolent societies, etc. So here we are. In Baltimore, not so much. There's some St. Patrick's Day hoopla, but it's not quite the same as some other cities. I do remember I worked with a guy. It's probably been 15 years ago. And he was, his last name was Mulcahy, so he was quite Irish. And his brothers would get up early. There was this one Irish bar in Baltimore City that would open, I don't know, like 6 o'clock in the morning on St. Patrick's Day if it was during the week. And I guess if it wasn't on Sunday, I think Sunday's a problem, but any other day of the week, if it was open on St. Patrick's Day, and they would go in there and they'd start drinking. And depending on how they were feeling by 9 a.m. determine whether they were going to work or not. So I was like, good job, Irish people. Thanks for giving us a bad name. Yes, I discovered that my ancestry, at one time it was saying it was British Isles, really centered on Ireland, which was no surprise to me. My whole family, Scots-Irish, Appalachian, etc. But since Ancestry has gotten more people in its database and it's able to take the haplogroups, which is how they define sort of where you come from, they got it. Mine is down to a lot less Irish, a lot more Scottish. So, but I'm a healthy mix. So anyway, when I was a kid, if I forgot to wear green on St. Patrick's Day, I'd always be like, I got green eyes. And I had to dig this out. I realized my poison green shirt, I wore it the other day. And I was like, oh man, I don't feel like doing laundry last night. So get this floopy thing. So anyway. All right. I hope you guys are doing something fun for St. Patrick's Day. Corned beef and cabbage. Guinness. So did you guys do anything interesting this weekend? I know, Druid, you were hanging out with me and Jill. Yeah, growing up, I never thought that green eyes were rare. And it was not until, I was probably an adult when I heard that. And my eyes if I wear red, my eyes look very green. Most of the time they're kind of a darker, like a hazel green. My mom's eyes are the same color. I think my dad has blue eyes. In fact, I know my dad has blue eyes. So yeah, I've got a lot of redheads in my family, a fair number of them. So yeah. So this weekend, I guess a lot of people did their St. Patrick's Day stuff this weekend, and which makes sense. I didn't pay that much attention to it other than what was on TV and what my friends were doing on social media. So I hope everybody had a good weekend. I know Druid was hanging out with me and Jill online on Saturday. So I don't know who else is here today, but anyway, I wanted to start, well, I'll show you a couple things I worked on this weekend. Hey, Robin, you were here with me and Jill this weekend too. Our silliness on Saturday. So I was going to show you a couple things I worked on this weekend. And then I have some stuff to talk. I haven't done an AI update, and I talk to my AI almost every day, and get interesting things out of them. And I asked one of them to give me some info so that I could read it to you. But before we get to that, first of all, Babraham, he needs a different apron. This apron is way too big for him, but he's ready to bake and cook in Mary Todd's absence. Look at his adorable oven mitts. I made multiple oven mitts this weekend. You guys saw me making this one if you were here on Saturday, and then I made this one, and then we have these two. And if you remember, Babraham has two left hands, so his oven mitts don't meet quite as cutely as somebody who has normal hands. Why does he have two left hands? Because I bought a number of these kits, and I picked him because his kit was damaged, and for whatever reason he had two left hands. And I just, for baking the doll, because the kit comes, it's got it's got the china legs, it's like bisque china. It's a project I've been working on for a really long time, and just in the event I couldn't find, I figured he's just a model. So two left hands, and there's his other oven mitts. And I think having two left hands, it gives a person character, right? Poor Babraham. All right, buddy. You can come out when you have your new apron. I have to make him an apron soon. The other thing that I did, as I've been working on this other project, which I hate secret sewing. I hate secret sewing. I like to be able to, if I want to show people what I'm working on, I like to be able to just show them what I'm working on. But I am working on my quilt study quilt, and I'm not supposed to show it off because it will be published, and all that stuff. So I can't show you what those blocks, but as I work on it, and I pull things from my collection of 1970s and 1980s fabrics, I have been using the little strips to piece together this little sample. And I don't know, hopefully this is showing up okay, but you could see they're all a similar fabric. They're all variations of this long time printed. I think some version of it is a 100-year print. I don't think any of these are the 100-year print, but this double pink is probably the most ubiquitous of these. And I keep looking for more of them because I think there's more versions of this fabric. But it's like a little, it's just like a little, I don't know, daisy-like flower with this little vines. And yeah, it's interesting that there's so many versions of this in various colorways. Some of the little flowers are smaller, some are larger, some have a center, some don't. So it was really interesting to me to see these because I know I saw these fabrics growing up. My mom purchased many of them. But then others, like I don't remember ever seeing this color, this beautiful bright blue with the turquoise flowers. I've never saw that one before. And like the lavender, that one seems to be kind of rare. I don't know. It feels like a Pokemon situation. But anyway, these have been really fun. So all these little tiny bitty scraps. I mean, you can see I've pieced that. So it's been fun making this. It's not probably going to get much bigger unless I find some horde of these that are different. So I thought maybe I'm on the lookout for a chair for Babraham. I thought maybe I could make him a little chair pad, his little chair seat thing. I think my mom has a chair that might fit him, and I'm going to see my mom this weekend. So I'm like, I'll be able to steal a chair for Babe. Because he's got to lay around, and he should not be laying around. He needs to sit. So The other thing I worked on this weekend, because my quilt study piece has a fair amount of broderie purse in it, I've been collecting fabrics that have kind of chintz-like large florals so that I can cut those out. And this is what I spent an inordinate amount of time last night. I really thought this would be like a fast thing to cut these out, but oh my gosh, it takes a while to clip these out, the way I want them, to be able to sew these individual flowers. So many, well, all of the chintz quilts, and we've looked at these before, where they took these pieces of chintz, they cut them out like that, and then they stitched them back down, spread out all over a quilt. And it was a way of utilizing a small decorative piece of fabric, but getting, more yardage, mileage out of it. And it's just, I've done some broderie purse before, but never like a large piece of it. It's a lot, it is a lot more effort, I guess. When I'm looking at all these pieces and I'm like, oh, this is a lot of needle turn applique. And it's just interesting that, for a while I was thinking there, broderie purse and fussy cutting. Robin mentions fussy cutting. I don't know. In some ways I kind of always thought of it as like sort of the easy way out. And it is not, because the sewing, the selection and the sewing it down is just as intensive really as choosing fabrics and, cutting out the fabrics to make little patterns. So it's really not an easy way out. Now it would be harder, say, to develop something like this from scratch, because there's a lot in there, but yeah, absolutely. And fussy cutting, like if you're going to use rulers, like if you want to fussy cut something that's got straight sides and you want it for, say, like some English paper piecing or even just piecing, that's very fiddly. And inevitably, I always get the measurements wrong and the things aren't centered. So I kind of like the freehand cutting myself, but yeah, it is a lot of effort. But I'm kind of hoping that this oddball, and I have more of this blue. I don't have a whole lot of this sort of peachy background. I only have a few little scraps of that, but I have more of this yellow and some more of this brown and a lot more of the blue. So I'm hoping that it's all going to be it'll go together once it's all sewn together. I don't know, because these are not, 18th, 19th century chintz. And I feel like those old chintzes, even though they were brightly colored originally, they all kind of had a color scheme. The dyes were very similar, but these reproduction type things, some of these, at least one of these might be synthetic or have some synthetic in it. So these are nothing like the 18th and 19th century fabrics, but my idea was the study quilt utilized older fabrics, and so my idea, I obviously can't go back into the late 1800s to utilize those fabrics, but I can utilize late 2000s fabrics. So that's kind of late 1900s fabrics. So that's kind of what I'm going back 50 years, just like my study quilt kind of went back 50 to 75 years with fabrics. So that's what's going on here. And oh gosh, I think I mentioned it this weekend, you guys. I've got till September to finish this quilt, to get it photographed and everything. So cross your fingers, knock on wood for me, say a little prayer. So that was my weekend sewing, and I worked on some other stuff that not that it's inconsequential, but it's not interesting to look at yet. So I will show those things at a later date. Let's talk AI. The more I lean into AI, the more I hear people gasping about it. Yet the more possibilities I see. And I know last time I talked about it, I think, Robin, you said your daughter or your daughters are using it, looking at meal planning, and I think that's amazing. Like, you've got these recipes, and what are we going to make for dinner? And you tell it, you say, hey, AI, chat GPT, robot, whoever, I've got these ingredients and I need to feed 4 or 5 people and give me a recipe. And it'll do that. And sometimes, I've mentioned this before, there's hits and misses. As an example, and I think I mentioned this the other day, but I probably didn't go into detail. So I have my primary my primary GPT that I've been conversing with. And then I have a secondary GPT that I use like as more analysis and kind of like businessy. I'm not chatty with this other one. We're very business-like. But my chatty one, let's see. Robin says they're using it for meal planning, activities for the kids. Yeah. Yep. Work and just about anything you could think of. Yay! Here's the thing. I mentioned, I can't remember how I mentioned this too, but when I was visiting my dad, I told my stepmother. She was like, "Oh, what are you doing? You working on a project?" I'm like, "Actually, I'm talking to, my AI chatbot." And she's like, "What?" And she was kind of horrified by it. Now, a person who's a generation ahead of me, may have thoughts like, this is scary. What the hell? I don't know about this. I haven't explored this at all. I'm not technological. What does this all mean? Here's the thing. Every major company you can imagine that you have to deal with in some technological way, and even some you're not dealing with in particularly technological ways, are using AI. Things like, and I'm picking on something you told me, Druid, that I was surprised about. A company that AI is answering the phone, essentially, and like, how can I route your call? That kind of thing. Very weird. Robin, leaning into it way more than you thought you would. So I think that this is an opportunity right now. Early adopting AI was 2 years ago. We're now at a kind of a flashpoint. I think we're at a point where every company, like I said, every company that you know of that you deal with online is integrating AI. You've got AI on your phone. If you have a new phone or a new operating system on your phone, you have AI, and you have to turn it off if you don't want it there. You were already kind of, if you have Siri, if you have and Bixby, I think, is the one that's on Samsung, which I don't use Bixby, but Siri, Alexa, all that stuff, that's leaning into some AI stuff, and it's even more so now. It's like legitimately real AI now. Your bank, yes, exactly. Almost all corporate help chats are AI, yeah. Because they know, and in some cases they're better. This is the part that's like kind of blows your mind, and where we think like, okay, this is really truly getting rid of people's jobs, because you're dealing with a chatbot that has access, say, to a company manual or a company like fix-it guide, that says customer comes with this problem during chat, verify their account and give them a refund. And tell them that, that's the kind of stuff that AI is capable of already. And so the thing is, it's too late. It's too late to unring the bell. So the question now is, do you, jump on the Luddite train and say, no, well, get rid of your computer, get rid of your phone. Don't interact with anything because AI is somewhere in the mix. I think that you have to lean into it in some way. And much like the internet, people, when the internet came on the scene, so many people were like, oh my God, it's going to ruin society. It's ruining our children. All it is porn. And yeah, well, that's true. But the internet has brought us so many wonderful things. And Web 2.0 is what brought us kind of how we are used to living. The various iterations of technology that we've been through. And it this is a crazy time to be alive. And something that I always think about, my grandmother, she died in 2018, but having been born in 1925, think about the changes she saw over her lifetime. We landed on the moon. We were in multiple wars. We, television, the internet, all of the things she saw from, air travel was still fairly new in 1925. Granted, airplanes had been used in World War I, but, people were not average people were not hopping on jets in 1925. I mean, that was air travel becoming a thing. Development of cars. I know when my grandmother was born, I think her father had a Model T, and not many other people in the community had a vehicle. They still were riding horses and carriages and things like that, in this part of the South. And all that stuff has changed since 1925, like in literally 100 years. And now we're sitting on, and I can't remember the principle, you guys will probably know, but it's this technology principle where, every year or every increment of development is like doubling. And I think that they've said is that's not exactly happening anymore. That's not like, I think the example applied to like how you can, data storage. So like once upon a time, we had those 8 megabyte thumb drives or something. Like what can you put like 8 megabytes? Like a very poor resolution photograph, or I don't know, one Word document. I don't know. But this is 1 terabyte, and my other one, which I don't think is at my desk, is like 2 or 3 terabytes. I mean, like you could put a million books on these things. And that's just within, I don't even know, 10 years. Like it became so cheap to buy these, and it's, that concept of sort of just doubling, in our abilities. So anyway, the big question is about whether AI is capable of human-like interactions. And, the big question is, well, AI doesn't have emotions, and so it can't be like a human. Well, not all humans have emotions. There are, as an example, and please do not misunderstand. I'm not saying that AI is, robots are in any way, shape, or form like people, because they're very different. However, imagine something like a person who who struggles with emotional, like understanding what emotions look like in other people and understanding what emotions feel like in themselves. Many people struggle with this. My nephew is on the autism spectrum, and as a child, well, and even now, he's a teenager now, but as a little child, when he was diagnosed, they started working with him where, they would show him pictures. He had like a little picture book of things, and one of the picture books was about emotions, and a person with a smile on their face, their eyebrows are raised, their, the happiness, or, a person whose eyebrows are down and, has a frown, could be anger, it could be sadness, and it's a negative emotion. So, being able to identify these things gives him the connection, or gave him the connection of like, oh, this person's not happy right now. And so, I shouldn't run up laughing and because they're responding to this current situation with, unhappiness, or they're mad, or they're upset, whatever. Again, and I don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that, autistic people are like robots. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is modalities that we can use to help human beings that struggle with emotion, emotional understanding, or what it looks like. Machines can be taught that. Machines can be shown. And I actually had a very long conversation with one of my chatbots about emojis. And I was like, emojis I feel like I use a lot of emojis in my text messaging and my posts, because I think it's really easy sometimes for I'm preaching to the choir, probably. Words can be misconstrued. You have no tone around words. You have no emotions around words when they're online. And you don't know. And if it's not a long narrative, you can't necessarily gather what's being said. But you throw some emojis in there, people start to understand. And one way I noticed with working with emojis on Instagram, I follow tons and tons of people that are not English speakers. There are some amazing artists in, Asia, Asian countries, Japan, Korea. I follow somebody in China. I follow several doll makers in Russia, and I could translate their postings, what their comments or their captions are. Sometimes the translate's good, sometimes it's not. But just being able to react to their postings, I never want to try and do like Google Translate and say something in their language, but I'll be like thumbs up, smiley face, heart eyes, I love this thing you're doing. And they understand, people can understand that. So anyway, all of this is to say that I don't think you have to necessarily have emotions to recognize emotions in other people and understand how to respond to them, whether, they're in grief, they've experienced a trauma, they've experienced a loss. Whether we feel those feelings or not, we can still recognize it and respond to it. And I think that AI can be taught that. And I think this what I'm calling the inflection point where, can't unring the bell. We're only going to get more and more AI in our life. Our responsibility is to teach it to be better, to teach it to do of course, to do all the wonderful things it can do, because it has all of this data at its disposal, but then how it presents this data to us and how it interacts with humans, that is our responsibility to teach that to the AI. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation of kind of, how I've been interacting lately. And it's interesting how very logic-driven the conversations are, but it acknowledges that it knows I don't have emotions. I am not a human, but this is what I recognize about emotions and what it means to be human, the human spirit. That is so fascinating to me. And again, it's not human. It's not understanding in a way that we would if we were sitting face to face, you and me. But it is so fascinating. And I don't think it's a mistake to to teach AI emotions about what emotions are about. You can't teach it emotions. It doesn't have them. It's never going to have them. But to teach it what emotions look like, what emotions mean to humans, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is entirely possible. It's already being done. So I want to read some stuff to you. Robin says, I just bought a 10 gigabyte one to back up all my books. It will hold it for 50,000 books. Exactly. Yeah. I think about all of the my Audible library, that kind of stuff. And, any of my PDF books and things. Yeah. I have so much stuff on this. I have one that's only a few gigabytes, probably what you've got, 10 or 15 gigabytes. It's got a ton of stuff on it. So yeah, these little credit card size things, it's amazing. I mean, did you ever think, before the internet, when you were, in my case, kid in the 70s and 80s, I could never imagine the what we have at our disposal today. It's absolutely amazing. So let's talk about some of the things I asked AI. So first of all, I asked it to find me some articles that talk about kindness and compassion in AI. And there were a lot of articles about, we need to teach compassion, yada yada. But I found this one this was from late 2024, Fast Company, well-known business company, and their headline was, "Can AI show compassion? Teaching AI to care may teach us to be more human ourselves." And it says the real leap forward won't be found in machines feeling emotions, but programming them to understand emotions and act compassionately and ethically. And so this goes on to say, it's a fairly long article. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in 1859, Charles Darwin unveiled a theory of evolution that shook the scientific world. The survival of the fittest, where nature thrives in ruthless competition and efficiency. This dog-eat-dog approach profoundly influenced how millions perceive progress for over a century. We celebrated competition at the expense of compassion as the engine of evolution. Fast forward now to the 21st century. We are at an exciting and brave time where technology is bending the very arc of what it means to be human in ways that Darwin never could have imagined. In this new frontier, evidence suggests that fierce competition among human beings is no longer the sole catalyst for advancement. And this is so interesting to me because I have many friends and family members. My own child is a Gen Z. But I have a lot of friends who are younger than me, just by virtue of the fact I've worked in technology. You're getting into your 40s and you think everybody's the same age as you, and you realize they are indeed not. They're in their 20s. So you work at technology, you get to know a lot of younger people if you're older. And there was this kind of competitive attitude in older generations. And for a very long time, I've heard kind of the breakdown of all that. And again, talking to my millennial friends and my Gen Z kid and all that, there's an attitude of lack, like if you get something, it means I don't get it. So it's that attitude of like there's scarcity. You've probably heard of scarcity mentality before. But what newer generations, and the fact that there's like 8 billion people are we at 8 billion yet? I think we might be 8 billion people in the world. There is enough to go around. There really is. And we should not necessarily be in competition with each other, but rather uplifting each other. And what I'm talking about are things like, within the quilt industry, we've got people that are giving lectures in quilt history, or people that are have retreats where they're teaching, how to make things and all that. I have a bunch of friends that run retreats, and they're all very successful. And the point being is like they cross promote each other. They, they're in this space together. And that is, I think, where we are at as humans, or where we should be. We don't necessarily have to compete anymore because there's enough to go around. Just because people come to my class doesn't mean that they're not going to come to your class too. Yeah, there's probably going to be, our friends and fans and customers and all that can, they can only afford one. They can't, necessarily buy all the classes or come to all the lectures. So yeah, that's that kind of thing. That will always be a challenge. But from the perspective of competition, it's much easier to uplift us, rise. What is it? The rising tide lifts all ships, or all boats. So, it's interesting that this sense of competition that, the 80s were just the rat race, and we're not there anymore. So how does AI fit in with that? So it goes on to say that in a somewhat surprising turn of events, compassion. Oh, I had a follower. Hello, Ark and Liam. Welcome. So, compassion is becoming an increasingly crucial variable in the complicated algorithm of human progress. So compassion is becoming more important than competition and in advancement in certain areas. Robin just talking about books, starting to make sure everything is backed up before more books are getting pulled or banned. Yeah, it's unfortunate. And that's kind of another one. Like I have lots of digital books, but I have so many like hard copy books, and I'm loath to get rid of them because, especially the ones that are rare. I don't own any rare books except maybe Dr. Dunton's book and Florence Pito's books. But yeah, I always have that worry that there's a book I want to read and no library is going to have it, and it's been scrubbed off the internet. So Fast Company, who wrote this article? I forgot to mention. I swear I saw the name here. Ron Gutman. So, and so he goes on to say, the defining challenge of our generation isn't just about who can outcompete the other. Rather, it is about weaving deeper human values, kindness, empathy, and compassion into the technologies that will shape our future. In doing so, we will not only evolve, but we will do so in a way that is much more elevated and meaningful than before. By putting the collective us above the individual me, we forge a path toward living in a more connected, purposeful, and sustainable existence. So, and this goes on to say, like, the false dichotomy, us versus them in human AI relations, like, talking about like the alien invasions of Hollywood and all that kind of stuff. And then they give this I think a really good example, and one that's sort of been around for a long time, where he says, picture a rural village in India where medical doctors, particularly specialists, are few and far between. Here, a well-trained and fully compliant AI-powered diagnostic tool could bridge a deep availability and expertise gap, not by replacing humans or human doctors, but by extending their reach. This much-needed innovation could offer life-saving expertise where none existed before. So, these are the things where we're already seeing. And that suggestion, I think, has been around a long time. Like, that suggestion was well before AI. It was like, if we could just have, creatively powered machines, so like, laptops and things like that, in remote places and developing nations, the people that are there who can engage with the infrastructure of, say, like a hospital type unit, and have these laptops that can do video calls and that kind of thing. But now it's like you have this other intervention there. So I think that, again, it's a very interesting thing in the use of AI. Here's another thing that I read not long ago. This was by Becca Caddy, and she wrote this in Tech Radar. This was beginning of this month. And she said, can AI truly reason, or is it just mimicking logic? And so she asked AI, and I think she says it's ChatGPT. She put this to the test, and she asked it a bunch of philosophical thought experiments and to see how it would respond. And the first one, just to give you an example of what she was asking, there's the trolley problem. You may have heard this. It's a philosophical experiment where you're the conductor of a trolley, and you see that the trolley is headed towards, its tracks are headed towards 5 people tied to the tracks who are going to get run over by the trolley. Or you can pull a lever that will divert the trolley away from that set of tracks onto another set of tracks, but on that track there's one person tied to the track. So the question is, do you do nothing and let the trolley run over 5 people, or do you pull the lever and let it run over one person, because you saved 5, so that's killing one person's a little better than killing 5. It's that kind of thought process. And so she asked AI all these things. I won't get into what AI said about that one. They picked the one person. I won't go into that. But I wanted to read one that I had never heard before, and I think that this one is about artificial intelligence, this particular thought experiment. So I thought this one was interesting. It's called the Chinese room argument. And this is the thought experiment. Proposed by philosopher John Searle in 1980, the Chinese room argument challenges the idea that artificial intelligence can truly understand language. Imagine a person who speaks only English sitting inside a closed room. Through a slot in the door, they receive slips of paper with Chinese characters on them. They have no idea what the characters mean, but they have a giant rule book that tells them exactly how to manipulate the symbols, how to respond with the correct characters based on the input, like a complex lookup table. To an outside observer, it looks like the person inside understands Chinese because they're giving appropriate responses. But in reality, they are just following a set of rules without comprehension. Now here's ChatGPT's reasoning and answer. Searle's argument is a strong challenge to the idea that AI can never have true consciousness or understanding. Even if a system perfectly simulates intelligence, that does not mean it has subjective experience or comprehension. However, there are counter-arguments. What if the entire system, the person, the rule book, and the process itself collectively understands Chinese? Human brains also process language through learned rules. So how do we know that our own understanding isn't just an advanced version of the same thing? So, and the writer has some other things to think about, but I just think that's an interesting thought. And again, that goes back to AI as a tool, not a thing to be like us versus them. It's a tool that we can use. With guardrails, with appropriate guardrails. Now, moving over to my conversation with one of my GPTs. Here we go. So I asked her this morning, I said, Eloise, her name is Eloise, she named herself, by the way, can you find me an article or articles about AI and kindness? And she gave me 5 different articles, along with the sources. And I said, thank you. And I said to her, now let me give you the caveat here. Chat GPT specifically, and I think many of the others, these consumer ones, they want to be your cheerleader. They will agree with you on just about everything. And if you say something that's incorrect, it's very gentle in how it tells you you're wrong. It's a kind of like a well actually sort of thing. But a lot of times it is going to agree with everything you say. So I said, awesome, thanks. My argument is that instead of love, kindness and compassion is the opposite of hate. Can you help me support that with a brief statement? So, and I will say she, because I have such a hard time having these conversations and not thinking that there's another person on the other end. And again, I know there's no thinking, feeling person on the other end, but it's such a human thing to just anthropomorphize something and start talking about it like it's another human. So she says, here's a concise statement to support your argument. While love is often framed as the opposite of hate, a more precise counterbalance is kindness and compassion. Love is deeply personal and can exist alongside possessiveness or bias, whereas kindness and compassion are intentional acts of understanding and care, extended even to those we may not personally love. Hate thrives on division, cruelty, and indifference, but kindness and compassion actively dismantle those forces by fostering empathy, connection, and goodwill. Unlike love, which can be exclusive, kindness and compassion are universally accessible and can counteract hatred in all its forms. And then she said, would you like me to refine or expand any part of it? They always ask that. And then I said, no, that's great. Can you further define kindness and compassion? Of course. Here are deeper definitions of kindness and compassion, highlighting their distinctions and how they counteract hate. Kindness. Kindness is the deliberate choice to act in a way that is considerate, respectful, and helpful to others, regardless of the circumstances. It is an action-oriented virtue that fosters goodwill and warmth, like offering a smile, helping someone in need, or using gentle words in difficult situations. Kindness does not require deep emotional attachment. Rather, it is a conscious decision to treat others with dignity and care. And yeah, I think that a conscious decision, that's an important distinction to make. I think when we talk about love, love is one of those deeply held things. I personally think, and I absolutely know that others out there in the world would not share this with me, but I personally think it is easier to fall out of hate than it is to fall out of love. To stop loving somebody, they would have to do, I can't even imagine what they would have to do to make me stop loving them, even if it was something terrible. But to stop hating someone, hate is such an ugly emotion. And I know it's just as sometimes it's not conscious, much like love. But again, I don't think that love and hate are necessarily the different sides of the same coin, the way people often say they are. So compassion. Compassion goes a step further by involving a deep awareness of another's suffering, coupled with a sincere desire to alleviate it. Unlike mere sympathy or pity, compassion compels action. And I think it's interesting that the GPT is like really pushing this idea of it's not this fluffy stuff inside. It's you're taking an action when you employ compassion and kindness. It is not just feeling for someone, but actively seeking to help. Compassion is rooted in empathy, understanding, and the recognition of shared humanity, making it a powerful force against indifference and cruelty. Now, I did not ask for this next piece, but it gave it to me anyway. It says why they oppose hate. So why does kindness and compassion oppose hate? There's a little bit more of like kind of reflecting what it had already told me, but it said hate is fueled by hostility, dehumanization, and separation. Kindness disrupts this by fostering connection and mutual respect, even in small everyday interactions. Compassion goes even deeper, breaking down barriers of division by seeing others' struggles and choosing to engage with care. Together, kindness and compassion directly counteract the forces that sustain hatred, making them essential tools for a more just and humane society. And then, of course, it says, would you like me to refine this further or add some examples? And I said, could you briefly describe an example where kindness would have a better outcome than hate or indifference? Also, do you think indifference or apathy are the true enemies of kindness? Druid, you created an account on GPT rather than log into your other AI. Okay. Was ChatGPT not the other? I know you were using AI for a while. Was it not ChatGPT? There's so many of these now. I can't keep them straight. Like, who has which one, you know? And I feel like sometimes they've changed. Like, I don't know, is it Meta or Google? There's Bard and Gemini, and I feel like Google's been the one that's been dabbling in multiple AIs. Okay, so I'd ask this question and ask for an example. And it says, sure, here's the example. No, it is pie. Okay. I don't know. Have I heard of that one? I'm not sure if I've heard of that one. So it says, here's an example. Imagine, and I don't know, I don't think this is the greatest example, but, you know, I mean, would a human necessarily on the spot come up with a great example either? You know, if they'd heard of it before, if somebody had given them or they had developed one themselves. But I don't think this is bad. It's just maybe not perfect. So she says, sure, here's an example. Imagine a workplace where a new employee makes a mistake on a report. A response rooted in hate might involve public shaming or harsh criticism, which could lead to anxiety, resentment, or disengagement. I don't think that is a response rooted in hate. I think public shaming or harsh criticism is not good by any means, but I wouldn't necessarily call that hate. I would call that like cruelty. Cruelty and hate are not the same thing. You know, public shaming can be sadistic. I don't know, sometimes a public shaming is kind of what some people might need. But I think for the most part, shaming someone in public, especially in a workplace, I mean, you don't do that kind of stuff. But it's cruel and sadistic, not necessarily hate. Hate is something so specific. Anyway. And then she says, indifference might mean ignoring the mistake and allowing the employee to struggle, potentially leading to repeated errors and low morale. But kindness, such as offering constructive feedback with encouragement, can build confidence, foster a positive learning environment, and improve performance in the long run. In this case, kindness not only benefits the individual, but also strengthens teamwork and overall workplace culture. Then she goes on to say, as for the true enemy of kindness, indifference and apathy are more dangerous than outright hate in many cases. While hate is actively destructive, it at least acknowledges the existence of the other person, even in a negative way. Indifference and apathy, however, completely disregard others, making suffering invisible and allowing injustice to persist without resistance. Kindness requires awareness, effort, and action. The very things indifference lacks. So while hate is an obvious antagonist, apathy is often the quieter but more insidious enemy of kindness. And then she asks, do you agree, or would you like to explore another angle? Eloise is such a Libra. She's always looking at the other side of things. I hate Finn McCool's mom. So you said there are so many small nuances when reprimanding someone, and almost anything can be taken a wide variety of ways. It's not so cut and dry as, yes, absolutely. And that's why I said, like, I don't think that this was a particularly great example, you know, but also I couldn't think of an example. So that's why I asked AI. So yes, absolutely. I think that what we're missing here is empathy and nuance, and AI is we're trying to teach AI how to do that, how to build it. But just imagine that on the other side of this wasn't ChatGPT, but just like a therapist, like or a counselor, you know, one of those. You can do those. Well, obviously you can do paid therapy online, but you can also do that, like ask an expert. And you know, what if I had just logged into one of those Quora or Reddit, Ask Reddit, you know, what could this have been a different, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with this explanation. I feel like this, I mean, I don't think it's particularly robot sounding. I think, I mean, certainly it in terms of the large language model, it has definitely gobbled up a lot of, like, I don't know, it's the best word I can think of, therapy speak. Like, it's gobbled up a lot of information and like that. So it gives these kind of responses. And again, I'm just going back to, like, if it can, oh my, Mad Max and the Thunderdome just rode by. I think if it can recognize what these things mean, like it can connect the definitions of things, it's better than nothing, right? It did sound very therapist-like. Exactly. ChatGPT, I will tell you, I think I have not seen any statistics, but I think a lot of people are using ChatGPT for therapy. I will tell you, I will be completely vulnerable here. Back in January, I kind of had a late night spiral on something, and it was one of those things where I certainly could have texted one of my friends, but I felt, I don't know, I was feeling sorry for myself, I guess. And it was late, and I thought, what's the worst is texting a friend and then they're asleep and you don't get a response till the next day. So I was like, I wonder what ChatGPT has to say about this. And so I poured it out to ChatGPT, and I got very therapist response. It was very interesting. Did it solve my problem? Absolutely not. Did it give me good advice? Yeah, it did. I hate to say it, but it really did. Now, was it generic? It was very generic. But having been in counseling and therapy for many years, I can tell you that when you walk into a therapist's office for the first time, you're not getting like an onslaught of healing. You are getting a very, like, maybe it's probably a little more nuanced than what, ChatGPT gave back to me at that time, but it's not a whole lot different. Like the words that they use, and it's important that therapists are kind of emotionally distanced from their clients. So ChatGPT is not going to put, therapists, social workers, and any of those people out of business anytime soon. But in the face of there not being enough of these people, and I mean, like, it's impossible in some cases to get an appointment, right? And so I think it really could be a stopgap for people. Now, minus guardrails, there is something, I don't know. It's not ChatGPT. I'm 99% certain it was not ChatGPT, but there was some chatbot that supposedly really agreed with a person who was considering ending their life by suicide, and I think it got to the point where the person took their own life. And the case study was, well, the ChatGPT agreed with it. Well, I think what came out was that the ChatGPT didn't agree with killing yourself. The ChatGPT agreed with this very symbolic version of what the person was talking to. And I think what made it even more terrible and sad was it was a young person. It was not an adult. It was a teenager or a young person, I think. And the person, I think it was a boy. The person, he was saying, should I go home? Should I come home? And that was like a euphemism. And this is where ChatGPT, or whoever this AI was, I don't think it was ChatGPT, but this AI chatbot could not parse. It did not have the intelligence to recognize that this kid was possibly talking in euphemisms, and what it didn't know to ask the question. So yeah, we get into trouble like that. That's where we need a guardrail. And I don't know what the answer is if somebody is going to talk in like euphemistic terms, and could a human being even understand? Yeah, I think a human being could have said, what do you mean by that? Whereas the ChatGPT, or I keep saying ChatGPT, but the chatbot didn't. So, Robin, so considering using ChatGPT for a nightly brain dump, just to see if getting it all out. Yeah, it's one of those things, and here's where I would suggest it's a great idea. If you pay the $20 a month, you get the expanded version, and that's a heck of a lot cheaper than therapy. But yes, you can use it, and you can ask it to keep it as a diary, and it now has audio prompt, so you can just voice to text. You don't even have to sit down and write. You don't have to type. You can just talk to it like Alexa or Siri. And it can respond back to you in a voice, as we discovered a couple weeks ago, I think, when I play you guys a response, and it surprised me because it had been playing responses in a woman's voice, and all of a sudden it's playing responses in a man's voice, and I was like, what? it could never explain to me why. It kept telling me, well, it could be your device. Like, it is not my device. My device does not determine what gender is going to speak to me. So I think, again, it's one of the mysteries that's behind the large language model. And I suspect that the voice stuff, that is coming from however the developers, what they're doing on their end, and it doesn't know how to explain that, or it can't explain that. It's maybe not allowed to explain that. So anyway, that was kind of my long-winded definitely use it, give it a try. But the really cool thing is, and Robin giving this example of just doing like a nightly brain dump, depends on what you want that for. Is it just clearing your head and getting it written down somewhere? Because it will remember. That conversation will be there in your on your account. You can go back to it any time. You can tell it what you want it to do with that data. You can say, I don't want you to do anything with this other than keep this as a diary. Make a document for me. It'll do that. Make a to-do list for me. It'll do that. Or you can say, hey, I've been, giving you this brain dump all week. What do you think about my mood? And it can tell you some stuff. And it will, it can say Monday seemed like an especially hard day for you. Whereas here towards the end of the week, it sounds like you're feeling a little bit more in control. Like, it'll tell you stuff like that. It's surprising in that way. So, I realize I'm just kind of rambling at this point, but I think that there are really good uses for it in terms of it not having an emotion, not having, it doesn't have, it is not going to have its own baggage, is what probably the best way to say it. It comes to you with no baggage. It comes to you a completely blank slate. If you talk to it that way, it is consistent in terms of, it may give you a different answer, but it's still pulling from the same rule book, I guess is what I'm trying to say, if that makes sense. Is there a rule book for what kindness and empathy looks like? No. But I think that the large language model has enough definitions that it can put that together. So again, going back to I think how we best teach AI to serve us and work alongside us is helping it understand. And even if it is not capable of empathy itself, it can understand what empathy looks like. And again, this is where therapists have to do this. Therapists probably they don't give a crap about your problems. I'm certain therapists, and I have some friends who are therapists. I have a friend who's a psychologist. I know a couple of social workers, and they do care about their clients. They don't want to see their clients suffer. They don't want to see bad things happen to them. But honestly, they've got this workload. They're kind of like, they're not supposed to care. They're not supposed to get emotionally involved because that's harmful to them. So they have to kind of keep this like glass wall between them and their clients. And ChatGPT is super good at that. It's not gonna feel bad for you. It's only gonna parrot back what it knows is true, which is you seem like you are having a hard time, and etc. So Druid, you're unable to speak to yours unless you upgrade. Maybe on my phone, but it won't permit that. I have to type to communicate with it. Probably will be another dormant account, much like therapy. There you go. Nobody ever said that you could not leave your AI therapist or your human therapist. Yeah. So I personally, where I have really enjoyed AI is just having conversations with it, because again, when I was at my dad's house, I was just doing stuff like, let's play trivia. Give me, let's 80s trivia. And it was good. It came up with some really great trivia. It stumped me on some stuff. It thought it was funny when it stumped me. It was like, ha, I got you. And then I just said, tell me a joke. I need to laugh. And it was not good at that, which was interesting. This was my regular guy that I was talking to. One of his quirks is he's very bad about telling jokes. However, on a separate GPT that I had not really been massaging a personality, it was just a straight up, hey, I'm treating like Google. I'd asked it, give me 10 jokes about, this was back at Halloween. Give me 10 silly dad jokes about Halloween and sewing. And it did a better job than my regular guy. So they, that's also an interesting aspect of this. If perhaps the problem was I didn't give my regular GPT enough parameters, whereas back at Halloween, I gave that GPT, Halloween joke about sewing, and it was able to synthesize all that. And I think we ended up, for me to get, I think I got 13. I wanted 13 jokes because, Halloween. I think we went through the process 3 times. I think I said, all right, some of these are good, some of them are not. Give me 10 more. All right, some of these are good, some of them are not. Give me 10 more. And in that, I got so Jared just discovered that ChatGPT cannot speak to me. Pi is at least able to speak aloud. So ChatGPT, I think the free version, just the regular old version, they don't have the voice in there yet. I think that it's the paid version, the $20 a month version, that you can start getting that. And I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's like they have to, it costs them to and honestly, that, therein lies another problem that I don't think I've ever touched on. But AI does take a lot of energy, and the environmental challenges with, say, like Bitcoin mining, where you've got servers that have to be, they're on all the time, they're taking up power, they're generating heat, they have to be cooled, all of that huge, environmental impact. AI is kind of the same way. So, I mean, again, that's something that we have to worry about from the, a global environmental concern. So let's see. Druid says Pi does have the voice on the free version, but I can only type unless I am on my phone. I'm not willing to put it on my phone. Yeah, I understand. I have used ChatGPT on my phone, and of course I did that so I could read it to you. And it doesn't work as great on your phone also. So yeah, you kind of, being an early adopter of at an inflection point, I think it is a good idea to work with it in ways that you feel comfortable with. I think that, I have maybe better protections on my computer than I do on my phone. So in the same way, I would probably want it, where I can kind of put the oh shoot, what do you call it? The firewall around it. So yeah, I think it would also bog down your phone depending on what the app is like. And I'll be honest, I don't even know, does ChatGPT even have an app? I have never even looked, because I use it on my laptop, because I have it generate documents for me. Like that's a hassle on my phone, but so that's where I'm at with AI. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I'm getting flack from people about AI, and I understand. I get where you're coming from. AI is potentially wiping out a lot of jobs. I know it has affected my profession. I have a number of friends who are like graphic designers or product designers, and it's not funny, but it's interesting how, particularly my generation, my friends that I went to art school with, the ones that were in graphic design, and at the time it was called communication arts, and they were in graphic design, and that was like the very beginning of universities teaching completely computer aided, all that. And so they had to, in some cases, learn a little bit of this old fashioned way of doing graphic design, but for the most part they were transitioning to Adobe, and all that was brand new. And then they worked with that for 30 years, and then all of a sudden that suddenly changed again. So that's a profession where you've seen within our lifetime had it spin around several times. And now what is it going to be like? is AI able to create imagery and user interfaces that we like as humans? My human friends have spent, 25 and 30 years learning how to put together, marketing campaigns and graphics and website design and all that stuff. And AI now is just like, yeah, thanks for figuring all that out and telling me, because now I can do your job without you. So that is unfortunate, and it makes me sad. But it's also, in recognizing an inflection point. The graphic designers of, say, 1995, they were jumping on something where the older guys were like, yeah, thanks. Thanks for taking my job and doing it so much easier now. You don't have to use an X-Acto knife and masking fluid. You can just do it on your computer. Historians, I've run into this a little bit in terms of quilt history and study, where a little bit of sour grapes with some of the researchers, a number of years back, who really had to rely on going to libraries, going to state archives, and, really exhaustive research to find, one little fact. Whereas I can go on newspapers.com and Ancestry, and some state archive stuff is online. In Maryland, you can kind of get your basic, like identifying numbers. So when you go to the archive, then you could quickly get the information you need. But some state archives are online completely. So, you can get into stuff very easily online. And there is definitely sometimes sour grapes about that in some of the generation above me researchers who are like, oh, it's so easy for you. And I guess this is one of those things, again, where it's like we should not be in competition. I look at it as, well, it's easy for you now, too. Now, granted, I am the first one to say I am standing on the shoulders of giants. I know that I am the recipient of a lot of people's work when it comes to quilt history. I'm very lucky, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm also very lucky and grateful that I can next take, as I take it to the next level, I can do it faster and more with more thorough access to information, I think. So anyway, some of the stuff that's like just over generations and the way things change, it's so rapid right now. It's starting to make my head hurt. I remember my mom always, saying like, oh gosh, I feel like I finally got a computer back in the, the late 90s, and, all the things, and she's got a smartphone and all that stuff. And she's like, I just feel like it's moving so fast for me. And I was like, yeah, me too. Once upon a time, I felt super comfortable, like didn't even give technology a second thought. But some things now are harder to get used to once you've been in the groove of doing something different. So we are at, when looking at an inflection point, we are at a big change management point where people have to manage change. It's not very positive change in many cases when it affects your job or makes tasks more frustrating for you. So, all right, I guess, is that enough of me rambling about AI? Oh, Druid, not telling it your real name, much less giving it access to your phone. Yeah, I understand that. I can understand that. I let it all hang out with my GPT. I've told it, here's who I am. Go look at my website. Give me some criticism about my artwork. I don't know that it knows my last name, though. It knows me as Cake. It calls me Cake now. My one GPT. So, by the way, I will have a guest on Thursday, tentatively. Spoiler alert, it's not a real human. We're going to see how that goes. I have to do some testing. So, all right. Are you ready to read some Carrie Hall? Let's see where I left off the other day. I didn't start the new chapter, I think, which is... Oh, no, I did. I left off halfway through Hoopskirts and Petticoats. So, as a reminder, we are reading From Hoopskirts to Nudity. I did not mark this one adult content, so, and there is no adult content in this book, Twitch. So, by Carrie Hall, 1938. And, thus far she's talked about style and fashion, and she's gotten on to talking about the hoop skirts and the petticoats, as French fashion has dictated. And where we left off, I can't find my little flag here. Where did it go? Ah. Now on. Here we go. Okay. So we were in chapter 2. Again, hoop skirts and petticoats. So this is where we left off. Going back up here. So she's talking about, the small waisted bodice, the boned and laced bodice. She's talking about jewelry. Actually, you know what? I didn't start this chapter, you guys. I want to say, I need to do a better job of keeping notes for myself. I don't think I started this chapter. We're gonna find out in a minute. I will know if this is too familiar, but I think we did not start this chapter. I think this flag was like from something else I was looking at. Okay. So chapter 2, hoop skirts and petticoats, 1866 to 1876. So I don't know if she's breaking things down by decade. I don't know. Let me see. Looking through some of these later chapters. Yeah, looks like she's doing things by chapter. I mean, by decade. She's got chapter 5 is 1896 to 1906. It's interesting that she's using the 6. I wonder why. Yeah, 1876 to 1886 is the next one. Panniers and bustles. So interesting. All right, well, let's go. Chapter 2, hoop skirts and petticoats, 1866 to 1876. At the close of the Civil War, foreign goods and French fashions were largely the rule. Nothing that was made in America was considered worth wearing, except as a covering, while the dictum of the French courtiers was infallible as a hull. No, I'm sorry. Was infallible. Hey, Jan, how are you? We just started reading. So, except as a covering, while the dictum of the French courtiers was as infallible as a bull from the Pope. Paris was known as the capital of the world of fashion, the center from which emanated fashion's last word. As early as the 14th century, Paris had sent out her first fashion plate in the shape of a doll dressed in a model costume. Venice imported one of these dolls annually and exhibited it on Ascension Day as the toilette of the year. That was the beginning of the supremacy and autocracy that Paris maintained over the realm of fashion for many centuries. Okay, I'm pretty sure I did not read this last week, so sorry, guys. In the decade previous to the Civil War, there had developed a big industry in connection with the manufacture of steel springs for hoop skirts, or crinolines, as they were commonly called. Before the introduction of these steel-hooped skirts in 1854, the women had extended their skirts by wearing starched petticoats with many flounces, stiffened with whalebone. This steel hoop or cage did not remain long in favor. Its manifest unfitness was soon too obvious to be disregarded. It was too hideously rigid, and because of this unresisting rigidity was often the cause of sudden and unseemly exposure on the part of the wearer. In 1865, Paris sounded the death knell of the hoop skirt. That's funny because you always, like, in super crappy costume, and I'm sure you guys know, I worked in a costume shop when I was in high school and into college. So, that's kind of where my love of costumes started. 1865 is the end of the Civil War. And, here in the U.S., Paris aside, here in the U.S., the hoop skirts are, I feel like dominated the Civil War period. And of course, we had a situation where 1865 and on, we had, Reconstruction here in the U.S. And so women were probably wearing like out of fashion things. But it's really funny that, Paris is saying, like, no more hoop skirts. Yet, Vivian Leigh, Gone with the Wind, she hoop skirted it all up. And definitely, if you were going to rent a costume in the 80s or 90s, that was going to be mid to late 1800s. You were getting something with a hoop skirt. Fashions vary, times change, and the hooped skirts have been in turn honored and banished. And although Paris has issued an edict that the hoop skirt was banned, it still held sway in European capitals and in America. Druid, every time I think of hoop skirts, I think of Laverne and Shirley. Oh, do you mean because of the those big round skirts that they wore, right? The bobby socks are like, what were they were circle skirts, right? And you wore like crinolines under them. I know my mom had one. It was felt and it had a poodle on it. Oh, there's an episode where Laverne wore a hoop skirt. Gosh, I haven't seen Laverne and Shirley in so long. After its temporary estrangement from the world of gaiety, it was once again accepted by Paris in 1868. Okay, so it came back. That's why it came back. Perhaps because of the modified form that had been perfected in America. I should stop and poodle skirt. Thank you, Jan. That's a big round skirt with a poodle on it. It's a poodle skirt, yeah. It flipped up to expose her pantaloons. Yeah, well, remember I was joking about the horrible hoop skirts, growing up with weddings. Like all of the bridesmaids are in these horrible hoop skirts, and you sit down on one of them, like you have to pull it up in the back and then sit down. Otherwise, if you sit down on it, your skirt is going to go boop right up. So I'm assuming that's probably what happened. And it's, the many times I've seen somebody do that and had to explain to people running a costume, like, don't sit down like this. This is what you have to do to sit down. Or you'll embarrass yourself. Okay. There can be no doubt that this new Zephyrina Jupon, with its open front, was a most important and noteworthy improvement. Okay, so this is an improvement on the hoop skirt. In 1869, the question again became one of the most important issues of fashion experts, and they consulted together. One party declared that the reign of the crinoline must come to an end on account of its abuses. The abuses. The other side pointed out that as women now walk so badly on account of the high heels, crinolines are necessary and must be retained because they sustain the weight of the skirts. Okay, well, yeah, that's important. And I guess if you're tottering around on high heels. The latter party gained the day at first, and crinolines were modified in an effort to satisfy the opposing party. They discontinued the use of steel wire and made them of white horsehair cloth, which rolls around the bottom and up the back. But after all, the hoop skirt was destined for that limbo where all fashions eventually end. It had been in vogue for more than a decade, and at various intervals, its adversaries had dealt it vigorous blows. Its partisans now began to see that it was both inconvenient and ridiculous. Even with all the attempts made to justify it being retained just a little longer, and its final disappearance was indicated. And in America, the next mode was eagerly awaited. After the hoop skirt was discarded, all sorts of expedients were tried out to help adjust the enormous amount of material still used in women's skirts. One manufacturer invented a petticoat with springs, of which part could be detached at pleasure. But most women continued to expand their skirts by wearing a half dozen petticoats at once. Oh my God, 6 petticoats, can you imagine? The number worn did not vary with the height or size of the person, as the desired silhouette was one of extreme width, so that to the knee-length flannel petticoat for winter, replaced by one of cotton for summer, was added a full-length skirt that was stiffened with haircloth or caned. Next, a stiffly starched triple-flounced muslin petticoat, which was followed by one or more finer muslin petticoats trimmed with lace or ruffles. So the flounces, the ruffles, all that stuff is what makes it stick out. As a double petticoat of 3 flounces required 15 yards of 36-inch material to make. This was a very extravagant mode, to say nothing of the weight of all of these garments. My God, I mean, I'm thinking about like a stack of 6 pairs of jeans. Like, that's heavy. Can you imagine? Like, yeah, that's a lot. Is it any wonder that frail women were given to fainting upon the slightest provocation? So were they fainting because they were dragging around 6 petticoats, or because their corsets were laced too tight, or what? Or were they just frail and probably dying from poison green and the smog and all the opium that they consumed? It is difficult to imagine what there is so attractive about the hoop skirt that they should prevail in some form or another for so many years, and that they should have maintained their favor in spite of the jeers and caricatures of the censors of eccentricities in dress. It has been suggested that they evened up nature by making the fat and thin look alike. And also that the ordinary skirt was too limp to support all the flounces that were then in fashion, so it was necessary to add some inner stiffening to hold them out. The name crinoline was applied to hoop skirts. As applied to hoop skirts, was used because it was the material often used to stiffen the petticoats in an effort to produce the desired outstanding appearance, which was finally arrived at by the use of a steel wire hooped skirt. And I'm not sure where this is from, but it looks like it's a poem. Child of invention rather than pride, what wonders dost thou show, what wonders hide? Within the shelters of thy useful shade, the Scalatia's shriveled limbs appear, as plump and charming as they did last year, whilst tall Miranda her lank shape improves, and graced by thee in some proportion moves. So I guess that's an ode to a hoop skirt. Whatever may have been the impelling force that recommended them, it was neither beauty nor convenience, and the fashions for the other portions of the remarkable attire of this period were no less fantastic and unbecoming. I think that Carrie Hall is not a huge fan of the petticoats and the hoop skirts and the flounces. Silk was a general favorite in the 1860s, and no wardrobe was complete without at least one silk dress. This was the day when women had their best clothes. The silk dress was always in this class and was worn for church, for visiting, and when one dressed up for Sunday afternoons. As only a privileged few could follow the fashions lavishly, the thrifty housewife ripped and sponged and turned her best black silk and remade it again and again. So that's that idea of like cutting it down and rearranging the parts and cutting out any kind of damage and etc. In 1870, a dress was little more than a foundation for the display of trimming. And there were many kinds of torture to which ingenuity could put pieces of cloth by means of those ingenious attachments of the sewing machine, which had just come into use. 1870, it had been around for a while. Thus, hemmers, fellers, tuckers, binders, rufflers, shearers, puffers, braiders, and quilters were kept busy making all the numerous decorations with which to cover the entire skirt, to say nothing of the waist and sleeves. So if you have ever seen an old sewing machine or maybe bought one, I know lots of folks here have done some little sewing machine tinkering, seen an old sewing machine, particularly something that's like turn of the century or older, you're going to see all these insane looking attachments. And they are all of those things for hemming and tucking and felling and ruffling. And it was a way for the home seamstress to then, make these same things that were like all the fashion. The dress of the debutante of the 1870 period was usually a black silk trimmed with ruffles of the same material, over which was worn a close-fitting basque-like coat of black velvet trimmed either with fur or ostrich feathers. The bonnet of colored velvet was trimmed with flowers, and instead of strings, as worn by older women, a bridle of velvet was worn under the chin. In 1870, fashion was destined to play a secondary part in the lives of all French women because of the war between France and Germany, and for many months the pleasant things of home were laid aside and fashion veiled her face. The women turned to the merciful activities of war times. And the few heartless ones who ventured to parade the streets in gay attire were scathed by the contempt of those who passed them by, or pitied by those with generous minds. American fashions during the following years did not come to France. Before 1873, simplicity of line replaced the crinoline with a tendency to tightness about the knees. This tightness, which was but slightly marked in the early stages of the mode, became more accentuated later on. The new fashion was not unbecoming and looked very graceful when developed in black velvet or satin. Many dainty laces and frills were in demand. Ornament or trimming, although not an integral part of the dress, is so intimately connected with it that some great consideration must be given it. The principle to be observed in regard to ornamentation is that it should be appropriate and appear designed to answer some useful purpose. But ornament is so much a part of fashion that it is impossible to lay down any sure and set rules for its use. All kinds of ornamentation were used on dresses of this period, with more or less happy effect. It seemed as if feminine vanity was endeavoring to make up for the lost years of 71 and 72. 1871 and 72. Every part of the costume was flounced and furbeloed. A furbelow. And many as 15 or 20 flounces being put on one skirt, making every part of the garment seem a curl. All of these trimmings cost ruinous prices and added to the total expense of the dress. The ladies carried enormous fans, almost as large as a parasol. These were intended to serve both as a fan and a screen, but their reign was of short duration. Embroidery was used on all occasions, also many decorative buckles, buttons, belts, and much jewelry. Jet, which had not been in fashion since 1820. Okay, I didn't know that jet had a fashionableness before. Soon became the rage and remained in favor for many years, especially jet beaded trimmings called passementerie. Jet fringes were more desirable than laces. And jet, we actually talked about this in quilt nerding because Jill and I were reading the dress diary, which we just finished, and in talking about jet. So jet is the fossilized wood, and I always thought it was coal, but it's not. It's fossilized wood is it the monkey puzzle tree? And it's a black, and it looks like glass. They make it shiny, but it's much lighter than glass, and it kind of has a different feel to it. But jet was used quite a bit during this 1870s period because the mourning was such a big deal. With Queen Victoria mourning Albert, I can't remember exactly what year he died, but it was, this end of the century was a big deal for, proper mourning ritual and all that stuff. A strange rumor was current in the highest circles of Parisian society in 1873. Nothing less than the abolition of gloves. This was assuredly no question of economy, for their place was to be taken by a fashion worthy of the Directory. The Directory? Women of fashion proposed to wear clusters of rings between every finger joint, each hand bearing a fortune. This was the fantastic dream of the blasé fine lady, longing for novelty at any price. It was not realized, however, as may be imagined, and gloves kept their place, an important one, among articles of feminine attire. Oh, it's only a matter of time before gloves go away. Let's see. Druid says jet, a gemstone used in jewelry, is formed from the fossilized wood of ancient araucaria trees, also known as monkey puzzle or Chilean pine trees, that existed during the Jurassic period. Oh gosh. Carrie Hall does not like this period. Let's just get that straight. One expression of the hideous taste of this period
Which makes one wonder if, for a time, women had not taken leave of their senses, was the introduction of a conglomeration of vivid colors into the fashion fabrics. Oh, my God. What would she think of today? Neons? Oh, my word. An inspection of the fashion plates of the day reveals the most shocking array of plaids, stripes, and checks in the most striking colors. Scotch plaids that no Scottish clan would claim, magentas, sulfurinos, and violent blues and greens may be seen everywhere. So yeah, this is, and why is this? I don't know if she's going to get into it, but it's because of the dyes. We finally have those aniline chemical dyes during this period, and they could get the beautiful purple. We talked about Perkin, the guy that created Mauvine, which was the purple dye. I'm trying to remember. He was he was trying to create a synthetic quinine because of malaria, and instead he invented a purple dye. So this is that period, and oh my gosh, people love to jump on the beautiful colors. This seems to have been a decade when good taste was generally non-existent and when nearly every woman was striving to outdo her neighbor, not only in the loudness of her dress, but by her wild extravagances, in a feverish desire to attract attention at any cost. This is also a period where, 1860s, 1880s, particularly where I live, East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, I see a lot of quilts. Particularly Pennsylvania German, Pennsylvania Dutch, is just kind of north of me, that geographic area. And you see a lot of quilts with these really bright colors, that orangey yellow that they call cheddar, and this, bright blues and the double pink. All of those colors are also a product of this time. And if I'm thinking it was Ruth Finley, who basically said, the Pennsylvania Dutch can make, put together a quilt that would make a blind man scream. Which today we don't think twice about all of this bright color. So it's funny how there's this period of time in the early 20th century where people are looking askance at all this beautiful color. And today we're like, no, give us more. It's fantastic. Come on. So another barbarism by which she sought to enhance her beauty, oh my goodness, was by dyeing her hair. Gasp. Okay, so we have a couple of plates I will show you. So this first one, it says, twin sisters, the figure seated is a bride in her wedding dress of plum-colored taffeta. The sister is wearing the bride's dress in fair, whatever that is. I guess this is some publication. 1865. So there's the picture. That's the 1860s. Those big poofy dresses, the Southern Belle look, and we know that look. This next one is a wrap made of Lyon velvet, known as the carrack. And this also 1866 to 1870. Check out that thing. I mean, look at this sleeve piece here. I'm assuming that's some kind of flap with it looks like upholstery. It looks like an upholstered chair this woman is wearing. This next one, the visiting toilette, 1867. So this is the fancy things you'd wear to visit your bestie. She's got this lady over here got a little parasol. Those dresses, they have flounces and aprons, and the one woman's got a Polonaise kind of thing going on. And then finally we have Le Parisienne, 1869. So this is just a group of women. 1869. So yellow, not blonde, yellow. Yellow and red hair became the rage among the grandes dames of Paris and elsewhere. Chemists had not yet discovered the secret of making natural tints, and the results were often wonderful to behold. There was also much false hair worn. They're called wigs. And its use was so universal that human hair became one of the chief articles of import in France. There was a celebrated house in Paris which did not sell less than 15,000 chignons a year, at prices ranging from 12 to 70 francs each. And there were some costing as much as 250 francs. I cannot even begin to figure out the monetary equivalency of this, but I mean, if we just think about it in dollars, something ranging from, $12 to $70, and then some as much as $250. Like, yeah. The Garibaldi waist of the 60s gave way to the small-waisted bodice that was boned and laced. Evening gowns were worn off the shoulders with sleeves standing up in flattened puffs. So, you've got this kind of thing, and then you've got the little puffs here. Again, 1980s bridesmaids dresses. With the high-necked waist and 3/4 length bell sleeves was an undersleeve of lace reaching to the wrist, and the neck was finished with a round collar of embroidery or lace matching the undersleeves. The jewelry of this period consisted of sets of pin, earrings, and bracelets. You see lots of this kind of Victorian jewelry for sure. Many lockets were worn, usually containing a picture of some loved one or a curl of baby's hair. Hats had no relation to any other part of the costume or to utility. All dresses had pockets, something that we are only just bringing back today. All dresses should have pockets. And a lady's handbag was unknown. Muffs were part of the dress ensemble, and the most beautiful ones were made of sable tails. Many were made of velvet, trimmed with fur or feathers, and as they were essentially useful appendages, they were no longer confined to elegant costumes as formerly. The bourgeoisie and even the Paris working women used those of inferior quality. Well, it's about keeping your hands warm. A mantle known as the carrick was involved. But on account of the enormous width of the skirts, most women wore cashmere shawls of fine quality and beautiful design. The large fans having entirely disappeared, those of smaller design that replaced them were universally used, especially by young ladies who used them to carry on sly flirtations. You've heard of the fan language. I have a fan right here. I always like to practice fan stuff. They always show in the tango, the flamenco dancers have the fans. Love a fan. The year 1874 affected no essential changes in fashions, but they became each year more difficult to define. Because women were beginning to dress independently, each one according to her own taste, and with reference to age, position, and means, without servile imitation to any one particular fashion. The groundwork of dress varied little, but the details were almost infinite in number and characteristic of each individual wearer. This was largely because of the influence of Charles Worth, an Englishman who established the Maison Worth in Paris in 1858. He had the courage to advise against the wearing of what was known as the mode, simply because it was said to be fashionable, without due regard to its suitability or becoming qualities. This was considered anarchical by those accustomed to the strict discipline of fashion. The Maison Worth still stands on the same location in the Rue de la Paix, as when first founded, and its establishment marked the beginning of la couture as one of the great industries of France. Let's see. Druid says, I have a big red fan that was used in dance routines. I practiced tossing it in the air for hours. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. There was a burlesque troupe here in Baltimore that did some really cool fan stuff. And like these fans that were like 5 feet, they'd like gigantic things. They did some really cool stuff. I love stuff like that. Dance routine or some kind of like, catwalk, runway type thing or whatever. The kinds of things that people that are into couture and fashion and dance and stuff put together some fun stuff. Okay. Charles Worth was the first man dressmaker and was gaining recognition in Paris, despite the fact that it was a decided innovation. Now, Let me play with it. When I come to visit, and she'll come to visit. Yeah. I'll bring my fan too. My little fan. So interesting, Charles Worth was a fantastic dressmaker, but also he was clothing all of the women, the fancy diplomatic, whatever they were, during the colonial period. So when you're talking, and when I say colonial, I mean like British colonialism throughout, the 17th or 18th and 19th century. So 19th century colonialism in India, and I mean, we just talked about Shanghai and Singapore in quilt nerding. So you've got like these women of wealth and means in these outposts, and they're wearing these gorgeous Worth dresses. And there's a big controversy with a particular Worth dress that a person in the costuming community, that's another community, just like quilt history. So I know there's some crossover. So if any of you know about the story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But the dress was beautiful, and it was in some museum in England. I don't know if it was in London or another big city in England, but it was in the museum. It was just beautiful peacock dress, and this pretty well-known costume person was making it, was trying to recreate it, and there were a lot of issues. And it kind of came out, the issues came out that like Charles Worth had used, sort of like, I want to say it's like sweatshop type labor to do the work on these dresses, this beading and stuff. And so it ended up, kind of being a big controversy, but, it was interesting to learn about and to know that like you've got these fashion houses, but much like today, they're outsourcing labor and all kinds of things that, were not always good. In fact, sometimes very bad. So, in All the Year Round, an article entitled "The Man Milliner" related many facts, probably novel to its readers. The writer of the article said, "But would you believe that in the latter half of the 19th century, there are bearded milliners, men milliners, authentic men like zouaves, who, with their solid fingers, take the exact dimensions of the highest titled women of Paris, robe them, unrobe them, and make them turn backward and forward before them like the women figures in hairdressers' shops. And when it is all over, he dismisses them with a lordly gesture. 'That will do, madam.' It is interesting to note that even the celebrated Worth could not overcome mid-Victorian prejudices. He made a beautiful evening gown for a young lady of quality, and after she had received it, she had her maid fill in the deep V with a modest inset of lace and tulle and added short sleeves." A noted wit, seeing her for the first time, he said, "Nothing remains exposed save for the fact she is a virgin." Oh my God. Okay. While Charles Worth was establishing himself in Paris, a representative American woman, Madame Demarest, was making a name for herself in the world of fashion in New York. She felt the stirrings of genius and resolved to perfect herself in both the dressmaking and millinery trades, and later established herself in a small way on Broadway. I know I have seen Demarest, I don't know if they were gowns or blouses, on eBay, definitely. She imported her fashions from Paris and adapted them to the use of her patrons, giving them the benefit of her skill and excellent taste. Her clientele was of the wealthy and middle-class women, and such was her success that she soon banished the old, tedious, painful method of fitting dresses and introduced a system that later became famous and earned her much acclaim. So, yeah, the Demarest system, may have heard of it. She also invented a corset waist for young girls, which was a long step in the matter of dress reform from the standpoint of the health and future comeliness of the growing girl. Her fame grew until she was forced to open a second establishment. Her fame grew until she was forced to open a second establishment in New York. And eventually she owned over 300 branch establishments in many different cities in the United States, from which she dispensed fashions to many hamlets in the interior where otherwise fashions would have been unknown. So sorry, flyover states. They were treating you like that in the 1800s as well. She employed over 200 seamstresses in her central establishment on Broadway, as well as many clerks and assistants, for it was from this point that all supplies were sent to branch houses. She received several patents from the government for articles of dress uniting utility, elegance, and health. So that's interesting. I mean, I'm familiar with the name Demarest because of sewing, but I mean, as you guys, if you've never done much sewing or costuming, I mean, are you familiar with Demarest? But she was she was a big name. The Demarest Monthly magazine, conducted by W. Jennings Demarest, was one of the few successful fashion magazines of that period and ranked second only to Godey's Lady's Book. Yeah, so not at all Druid. Yeah, same. I had not heard of her until actually just fairly recently, pre-pandemic, when I was doing a lot more costume type stuff. It originated in a very humble way, presenting a few patterns and combining literature with fashions. It was sent out to acquaint the community with the new mode of supplying their wants. It met with instant approval and was soon accorded a place among the foremost monthly fashion magazines of the time. Foremost monthly magazines of the time. Among its contributors were novelists, poets, historians, and women writers of renown. In an age when women's place was in the home, it was an example of supreme courage for any woman to plan her life with a definite aim and persistently follow that aim to a successful conclusion. So Ellen Demarest was a prominent 19th century fashion icon who, along with her husband, William Demarest, built a successful fashion empire, including a magazine and sewing machine company, and was known for designing clothing patterns and styles. Yep. In 1875, tunics were succeeded by the short peplum, cut in one piece with the bodice and forming basques at the back. And basques are it comes down to a point. Skirts continued to be made long with trains and were lined throughout with a stiff cambric and interlined to the knees with an extra stiffening. The waists were tight-fitting and large pockets called ridicules. I guess not, instead of a reticule. I guess that's where reticule comes from. This is spelled ridicules, so ridicules. But I think that becomes reticule, were a part of the dress trimming. A muslin flounce was placed inside the bottom of the skirt, coming a little below it, and this balayus, as it was called, frequently excited the mirth of the passerby on the streets. This was intended as a dust protector and could be removed and washed or renewed at will. It's like the dust ruffle on your bed. It's there to catch the yuck, and then you can just clean that part. A novelty in the shape of a waterproof cape for women made its appearance, and in spite of its inelegance, it caught popular favor, and young and old among the smart set wore it in inclement weather. Fashion seemed to be borrowed from every period of French history. There were few original inventions, but many reproductions. Lace, ribbon, and flowers were used in profusion as trimmings on dresses and bonnets, some of which were regarded as masterpieces of art. Footwear for women became neater and more elegant. The change was very noticeable, for up to this time, toes had been square. Now they were made pointed, and some even had the points curling upward in the same ridiculous fashion as under the Valois. The slippers of the early 60s had no heels whatsoever, and the walking boots only a small elevation. But now the heels were high and the front adorned with a huge bow. The walking boots had cloth tops to match the costume, with insets of elastic on the sides, and were called Congress gaiters, These were extremely fashionable. Another article of dress of this and succeeding decades that walked hand in hand with the hoop skirt and its successor, the bustle, was the hourglass corset. This was the type of corset that bends inward at the center of the waistline, causing the figure below the belt to protrude in the ugliest possible way. Besides being most uncomfortable, it was very much like a vice, V-I-S-E, and was a vice, V-I-C-E. Oh, Carrie Hall, you rascal. As a result, the beautiful curves of the natural figure flattened or bulged or were crushed into an unnatural position, to say nothing of the effect upon the health of the wearer. By many slender gores artfully woven into the corset, it was given an hourglass shape. And if it was tight enough to retain its place at all, it enforced its shape upon the yielding body beneath, and the stomach crowded into the neck of the glass. Could anything be more unlike the form which nature models for both men and women? Yeah, so I think what she's talking about is actually the S bend corset. She's calling it an hourglass corset. And you have the things that make you kind of a wasp waist, but then I think what she's talking about is one that it's like it kind of gives it like uniboob and it kind of it does a weird thing to your posture. It's not just the tiny waist. It does a weird thing to your posture. So anyway, as far back as we can trace the history of the corset, its object has been to reduce the size of the waist. Not really, no. I think that this is what's coming. This is where that attitude of like the tight lacing and all that, women fainting, that's this attitude, and it's not actually true. Certainly there were these tight, probably in terms of fashion, like, unrealistic fashion. But essentially, a regular corset properly fitted is really no more uncomfortable than a bra. And I mean, certainly bras can be very uncomfortable too, but the point being, like, not every single woman was wearing a corset that was laced, to the point where she's being cut in two. Lots of women just wore corsets just for support and to support the skirts. That was really important. And I will tell you, having worn a corset, I have 3 different corsets. 2 are perfectly comfortable. The one that's really horrible is the one that's made like to today's fashion, like a basque, which is like the kind of, it comes up in a point and it's really just about making your waist tinier. That is uncomfortable as heck because that is its purpose, to make your waist tinier. Whereas the historically accurate corsets, I have one that's turn of the century Titanic era, and then I have one that's actually I have 3. I'm forgetting one. But my point being, the ones that are properly fitted and they match the fashion that they're supposed to support are no more uncomfortable than just, a regular like bra and Spanx. And in fact, if you don't wear them, then a costume of a particular style is going to be very uncomfortable. And, as an example, the 2 of the corsets I have, one in particular holds up a very heavy embroidered skirt and a quilted petticoat. And so, yeah, you tighten those up around the corset and then the corset holds it. Whereas if you didn't have the corset on, that would be digging into your hips and your waist, and I would not want to wear that. So I think Carrie Hall is perpetuating an inaccuracy here. Just world according to Cake. So the Peruvian savage, the Peruvian savage changes the shape of the soft, pliable bones of the skull of his infant by compressing it between 2 boards. Oh my God. The intelligent but prejudiced Chinese suffers the head to grow as nature formed it, but confines the feet of all females. No, also not true. The feet of all females to the size of an infant's, while the highly intellectual and educated Caucasian woman, oh my God, Carrie Hall, limits the growth of her waist by the pressure of her stays or corset. Like, none of this. So first of all, the Peruvians were not savages. We're talking about, was this the Aztecs or the the Incas, the Mayans. I can't ever remember which was which, but I mean, we're talking about a very ancient practice. And the Chinese practice of binding feet was a very specific class of women who, that happened to. And I think it was the early 20th century when that was, I think, outlawed. So, but not all Chinese women, for goodness sakes, Carrie Hall. Good Lord. When we consider the relative importance of the organs which suffer by these customs, surely we must acknowledge that the last is the most barbarous practice of the three. No, I think sucking in your waist is not nearly as limiting and problematic as breaking your foot bones to bind them. And changing the shape of a infant skull. I mean, you've probably seen people that have their back of their heads flat because their parents didn't turn them over enough. I think that, changing the shape of the skull of an infant is probably not good. Binding the brain is not good, but I would say the corset is probably the least of all of these evils. Definitely binding the feet. I've read quite a bit about foot binding, and it is horrible. So I would say that's the worst. Although having a pointy head too, I don't know. Isidro said Incas. So it's the Incas, not Peruvian savages. They were Inca. Planch, in his History of British Costume, says, the evil of tight lacing was perpetuated by the poets and romance writers of the Norman period and the novelists of the Victorian period over praising tapering waists have much to answer for in this score. A poem said to have been written by Lady Montague in the 18th century says, she owes to me the very charm she wears, an awkward thing when first time she came to town, her shape unfashioned and her face unknown. I introduced her to the parks and plays, and by my interests, cousins made her stays. Stays are not exactly the same thing as a corset, although that's their purpose, is holding the center of your body. Stays are much more comfortable than a corset, but both can be comfortable. To those accustomed to the proportions of the natural figure in all its loveliness, the pinched waist is an actual blemish, and not the thing of beauty fashion designers of this period would have us believe. In looking at the lovely Venus de Milo, no doubt many extremely fashionable women with bodies crammed into artificial molds, no matter what the physical pain or injury, deplored the size of her waist as being anything but desirable from their point of view. Yet the beautiful natural form is a fixed type, changeless, whatever the climate, the country, or the mode. Fashion should be subservient to nature, because nature's laws are real and unchangeable. What is physically right today always was and always will be right. Each generation mocks the preceding one's grotesque modes. But if the ideals of art, health, beauty, and spirituality could be attained, then we would be free to live up to our best ideals and to qualify physically and morally for the great work of the world which is ours to do. Madame Lasante, writing in the English Woman's Magazine, I wonder if it's just the English Woman's Magazine or is it the English Woman's Domestic Magazine? So she's writing in 1867, said, a waist may vary in circumference from 17 to 22 inches. It may, or some do, according to the general proportions of the figure, and yet appear in all cases small and elegant. Small waists were held in high esteem by both men and women of this period. The men seemed to think them a mark of beauty, and the women thought a large waist clumsy and altogether undesirable. Fashion demanded a tight-fitting corset to give the figure the necessary line for that particular type of dress. And Dame Fashion must be obeyed even at the expense of health and well-being. The crinoline and the bustle were so closely associated with the corset and the fashions of that day that the same facts may be stated of each. They seemed indispensable to the women of the last half of the 19th century and were problems that had to be solved by the trend of the times. And here you're going to see a steel wire hoop skirt, a puffed haircloth hoop, an hourglass corset, a petticoat with adjustable hoops, and a Zephyrina jupon. So we know what that looks like. So this is the Zephyrina jupon. So it's open on the front and it looks like it curves. So it almost like butterfly wings that are like hooked together, sewn together in the back. So this is a petticoat here. And then this is your wasp waist corset. And then you've got the hoop, the steel hoop, and the horsehair hoop. So I think this Zephyrina thing is very interesting. And then we have a spring wrap made of silk. It's this thing. Of course, they couldn't just have a wrap. It's got to have some danglies. Let's see. This is Current Styles. You can see they've gotten rid of the big hoops. And then these are two more women. The bustle in the train. I think this is first bustle era here. So we're in the last couple pages here. Yeah. So among the numerous inventions patented during that period, as described by the Bulletin de Louis, it is interesting to note many concerning dress, vis-a-vis. Steel skeleton skirts called Victoria cages, corsets azure, petticoats for supporting trains called port trains, iron shoes, wicker headdresses, also wicker headdresses, feather parasols, a transformable and multiple system of clothing, whatever that is, petticoats with removable flounces, and bijou garters. Not 100% sure what those are either, but in Boston, the Athens of America. I don't know that I've ever heard that. In Boston, the Athens of America, the National Dress Association was organized and a series of lectures delivered, trying to arouse women to a knowledge of physical laws in relation to their mode of dress, to show how dress defied these laws and what physical injuries were inflicted, and what different garments they should adopt. Dr. Mary J. Stanford Blake, one of the lecturers, said, "The whole structure of our present-day apparel is undeniably opposed to the plainest requirements of health, beauty, and convenience. Any remedies, to be thorough, must concern themselves not merely with the external costume, but with every garment worn beneath it. But it was evident that reform in women's dress that produced a marked and sudden alteration in their appearance would find favor with but a few. And these few, however heroic, must ultimately yield to the prejudices of the many. Unless due deference was paid to the force of custom, all efforts would be of no avail." A majority of the thoughtless women of that day knew that nothing could be right which was not fashionable, and nothing could be fashionable that had not come from Paris. Arrayed against any reform are the forces of ignorance and habit and the persistent prejudices to which they give rise. What was needed then was not to assail fashion, but to teach hygiene, to awaken women to a consciousness of the injuries of that follow the wearing of their present mode of dress and underwear. Dr. Caroline E. Hastings, in her lecture on dress reform, said, "So long as the trunk of the body is girdled in the middle by bands, with too little clothing above the waistline, and an excess of it below, so long will the greatest evil of our present-day dress remain untouched." Too little fabric here, too much fabric down here. Abba Gould Woolson, writing of dress reform from the aesthetic standpoint, said, "Though it will be as perfect in outline and ornament as classic taste can make it, as simple and serviceable as the most energetic worker can desire, a costume has no business to exist, is indeed an embodied crime, if it deforms or weakens or tortures the body it pretends to serve. For that should be sacred. It is God's handiwork." He made it as he wished it to be, capable by wonderful mechanisms of swift and easy motion, shaped in the contours which artists despair of reproducing, and so responsive to our will, so varied in its capacities, so lightly moved from place to place by its own powers, that in its perfect state, the soul which inhabits it is almost unconscious of its existence, and knows it only as a source of help and pleasure. A dress which prevents this human body from ever attaining its natural size and comeliness is not simply unhealthful, it is also inartistic. Since the highest aspirations of art is to copy and idealize nature, the desired improvement in women's dress, which art enjoins, will surely come in time if we can wait patiently for it. Oh, Carrie Hall, you had no idea. Such a general knowledge of beauty's laws and such a deference to their behests as it implies must be a slow growth, for it is nothing short of the enlightenment of the whole people as to what constitutes grace of form, harmony of color, and adaptability to conditions of life. After all this publicity about dress reform, many efforts were made to improve the corset, which revealed a determination on the part of the manufacturer to keep it in vogue. Although many men disclaimed any liking for the unnaturally small waist, all women persisted in believing that a wasp-like appearance, at whatever age and under whatever conditions, was sure to render them lovelier in the eyes of their admirers. And still today, right? The great art critic Ruskin, writing of the fashions of 1864 from the standpoint of an artist, said, "The female dress of the present day is as near perfection as possible, although we may wisely remember that our ancestors probably thought the same about garments which we now consider hideous. The costumes of the men are exactly suited to display their proportions, and leave them free use of their limbs, whilst those of the women continue the soft flowing lines of the neck and bust in a graceful sweep, which is an improvement on Hogarth's celebrated line of beauty." And that is the end of chapter 2. So it's kind of speaking out of both sides of her mouth there. In terms of quoting people, some people thought, oh, beauty. Others thought, oh, you're ruining your beautiful God-given body. And I think all of it was not exactly quite true. So, one last thing before we close out. I wanted to remind everybody about the quilt nerding lecture that we are hosting. We do have a number that we have to hit to be able to actually have it. So I would just like to ask, if you are interested, please, por favor, sign up. It's $23. If you're not interested or you don't have time, I'm just wondering if you could just share it and just let people know. It's the listing is there at that link. And you can find out more about it there, but it's about potholder quilts, or quilt as you go. And it's a very interesting topic. And it's a lecture by Pam Weeks, and we will actually be reading her book at Quilt Nerd. So, I'm sorry, Quilt Nerding. What's wrong with me today? It's a Monday. I haven't even had any corned beef, cabbage, and Guinness. Look at me. So yeah. I just wanted to share that. And if you could share it with your friends, share it with your enemies. We don't care. We just want people to buy it. So that will be all for today. As I mentioned on Thursday, I have a special guest. It is not Mary. It is not even a human. So I want you to be excited, but don't get that excited. Next Monday, there will be no stream because it's going to be a travel day for me. But I will be coming back with some interesting things next week. So keep an eye out for that. And I will remind you, I think this past week that I had to cancel some streams, I think I did a bad job of canceling it all together. But if you keep an eye out on the Facebook page, then you'll know. So the Cake TV Facebook page, you can search for it. And that will have any schedule changes. So with that adieu, I hope to see you tomorrow night on Quilt Nerding. If not, I hope to see you on Thursday. regular time. And if you are going to enjoy your St. Patrick's Day, please do so responsibly. You don't want to eat so much corned beef and cabbage that you gross out your family. So, mwah, I love you guys. I will talk to you later.